week 15 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units I look to drop this week. The first one, the Seattle Seahawks. So the Seahawks, they were a 1 week use only defense last week, where you thought they had a plus matchup, which I definitely did, versus the Panthers. VC's had offensive problems all season, but in that one, 30 points allowed, 2 sacks in that one. And now their next matchup's Thursday Night Football versus the 49ers. I know Jimmy Garoppolo's out for the season with the foot injury. We know Deebo Samuel's not going to play in this game with the ankle injury, and Purdy's also day-to-day with a rib issue. So even if Purdy does play or doesn't play, I don't think the Seattle defense could do much. Niners give up the 17th most fantasy points to defenses on the season, but you just can't trust the Seattle defense. They had a couple good matchups over the last few weeks here, but they just couldn't get the job done. So right now, their defense I would drop this week here, because then they got San Francisco and the Kansas City Chiefs the next 2 weeks here, and I would drop them. The next defense I'd look to drop is the Tennessee Titans. So the Titans, a lot of people thought they had a good matchup on paper versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, especially a team on the road that just can't get the job done over the last few seasons here. But this Titan defense, they've fallen short over the last few weeks, and they might change the whole regime. We saw the GM get fired, and I wouldn't be surprised if Vrabel gets fired towards the end of the season or at the end of the season. So the last few weeks for this defense, week 12 versus the Bengals, 20 points allowed, a sack in that ball game. Week 13 at Philadelphia, 35 points allowed and 2 sacks. And then week 14 versus Jacksonville, 36 points allowed. So the last few weeks, 2 points, -2 points, -4 points. And week 15, a tough matchup, obviously, at a high-powered Charger offense who has Justin Herbert. Keenan Allen is back. Mike Williams is back after having a big fantasy day. And that doesn't spell good for this Titan defense. I would drop them this week. In the third and final defense, I look to drop the Las Vegas Raiders. So the Raiders obviously was a 1 week use only defense here, and they didn't do anything really of note with only 7 fantasy points in that ball game at the Los Angeles Rams, and Baker Mayfield driving down 98 yards to win the ball game for them. So the last few games here for the Raiders, week 12 at Seattle, 34 points allowed, 3 sacks and info. Week 13 versus the Chargers, 14 points allowed, 5 sacks, a fumble recovery. Week 14 at the Rams, 17 points allowed, 4 sacks and a fumble recovery. 15, a decent matchup versus the New England Patriots that give up the 7th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. But right here, I just can't trust this Vegas Raider defense. This Raider team, I think this Patriot team can run on them decently in this ball game. And right now, their defense has a lot of lapses. To give Baker Mayfield the 98-yard drive, the guy who don't know the playbook, and he's going out there and just playing street ball, is obviously not a good thing. So right here, this Raider defense was a 1 week use. They didn't really do much, and they pretty much have topped out at 8 to 9 fantasy points max this season. So that's a few defense DST units I look to drop here for week 15 of the fantasy football season.